He goes downstairs to buy some bread, just as his ex-wife asked, completely unaware that he's walking straight into a carefully planned trap. But the moment he returns and puts the paper bag down, he notices something strange. A blood-stained knife lying on the floor. Instantly alert, he follows the faint scent of blood in the air and steps into the bedroom, only to find Lenore, his ex-wife, lying stiff on the bed. Her throat is brutally slashed. She's already dead. Before he can even react, two armed officers burst through the door. Bryan doesn't know what's going on yet, but from the looks of it, he's clearly been framed. But trying to arrest a former top CIA operative with just two regular cops, that's wishful thinking. He quickly takes down both officers, but more footsteps echo from the hallway. Without hesitation, he dives straight out the window, using his body to absorb the fall. He grabs a drop pistol and runs as police cars begin to close in. Bryan knows he's now the prime suspect, and if he wants to clear his name, he must first make sure he doesn't get caught by the police. Luckily, he knows this area like the back of his hand. He climbs walls, overcomes obstacles, and runs desperately, eventually slipping into a house. He slips into the garage, tosses away the stolen weapon, and quickly rolls under a parked car. Beneath the wooden floor, there's a drainage hatch, his pre-planned escape route. Without a second thought, Bryan jumps in. By the time the police enter the garage, it's empty. Their suspect is already gone. At this moment, Bryan has escaped through the sewer. He ignores the foul smell on his body and immediately finds a payphone to tell his daughter Kim about his ex-wife's murder, repeatedly warning her not to believe anything anyone says, and that he will find a way to contact her again. The shocking news almost breaks Kim on the spot, but there's nothing she can do. Meanwhile, Bryan arrives alone at an abandoned waste station, passes through a hidden door behind a power box, and enters his secret base. He quickly digs out hidden gun parts from various corners. No matter who the bastards behind this are, they will pay with blood. On the other side, the police quickly identify Bryan after investigating the crime scene. However, the bread left behind catches Sheriff Frank's attention. Premeditated murder with a loaf of bread seems odd. Despite the doubt, Bryan remains the prime suspect and must be captured quickly. However, the records show Bryan served in Special Forces at 23, and since then, there has been no record of him, clearly making him a tough target. So the sheriff pins his hopes on Bryan's daughter, Kim. The next day, the sheriff visits the ex-wife's house, trying to get more information about Bryan from her current husband, Stuart, and daughter, Kim. During the conversation, the sheriff notices a detail. Kim repeatedly insists that her father, Bryan, could never be the killer, and shows obvious hostility toward Stuart. However, he doesn't press further, instead having his team secretly plant a bug in Kim's clothes. At the same time, Bryan starts his own investigation. He hides in a car's trunk and sneaks into the police garage. He then copies a driving log from his ex-wife's seized sports car, returns to his base, and finds that his ex-wife had visited a remote gas station the day before her murder. This unusual trip catches Bryan's attention. He wastes no time and rushes there. When he shows a photo of his ex-wife to the attendant and asks if she's seen her, the attendant says she doesn't remember. So Bryan pulls out a fake police badge and demands to see the surveillance footage. Soon, a major discovery is made. His ex-wife had indeed driven there alone, but at a critical moment, the system freezes. And worse, two police officers arrive at the scene. The front desk attendant becomes visibly annoyed when questioned. At this point, Bryan sees that his ex-wife was indeed kidnapped here. When two armed officers burst in, he completely ignores them, continuing to meticulously review the surveillance footage, frame by frame. Only when he spots the tattoos on the arms of the thugs does he raise his hands in surrender, allowing the officers to cuff him. Bryan is then led to the police car without a hint of resistance. The arrest goes smoothly, but when the sheriff hears the news, panic sets in. He tells the officers to stop the car, but thinking handcuffs alone can hold a top agent is pure fantasy. In just a few seconds, Bryan frees himself, and the officers in front remain oblivious. Seizing the moment, Bryan quickly grabs one officer by the neck, punches the driver to push him back, snatches the handgun, then swiftly pushes the officer in the passenger seat out of the car. He then aims the gun at the driver, ordering him to keep driving. Other police cars quickly notice the situation and give chase. Bryan waits for the perfect moment, sharply turns the wheel, and using the slope by the guardrail, the car takes off, soaring across to the opposite side of the street. Though he temporarily escapes the police pursuit, his high-speed stunt causes a chain reaction of accidents. A heavy truck, unable to avoid the collision, crashes into a stone pillar, and with tremendous inertia, the entire truck bed is instantly thrown out, creating a dangerously chaotic scene. Luckily, Bryan's driving skills allow him to narrowly escape the scene. Once he temporarily shakes off the pursuit, he forces the officer out of the car, takes his radio and phone, and drives off. However, with the sheriff deploying a helicopter to direct the chase from the air, Bryan's location is soon discovered again. But he remains calm, driving while dodging the police and searching for an escape route, all while quickly copying data related to the case from the police system. In a hail of bullets, Bryan drives into a parking garage, with the pursuing officers quickly surrounding and blocking all exits. Bryan is cornered, but just as it seems all hope is lost, the data finishes downloading. With no way out, Bryan decides to make one final move. He slams the car into reverse, charging straight into the elevator shaft. The car scrapes violently against the steel framework as it rapidly descends, sparks flying and igniting leaking fuel. With a massive explosion, flames erupt into the sky, engulfing the entire building. The sheriff thinks the situation is finally over. But to his surprise, he soon receives a call from Bryan. Bryan tells him, "As long as you know I'm innocent, that's all that matters," without wasting any more words. He then heads straight back to his secret base, where he hands the newly downloaded data to his old friend Sam, asking him to investigate and look for any clues. The next day, at Lenore's funeral, the sheriff has deployed a large number of officers around the area, closely monitoring Kim's every move. He tries to spot Bryan by watching who interacts with her, but all he finds are Bryan's friends, and Bryan himself is nowhere to be seen. Bryan has already predicted the police's moves, so with the help of his old friend Sam, he manages to briefly meet Kim, using a hidden pinhole camera in his button. In the following days, Kim continues to go to school as usual, following Bryan's instructions. However, the police have not given up on monitoring her. She stops by a convenience store, picks up the usual yogurt from the fourth row in the fridge, and notices a note stuck on the box saying, "Drink it immediately." Seeing her father's familiar handwriting, Kim doesn't hesitate for a second and drinks it right then and there. She knows exactly what this means. Bryan has set this up to give them a chance to meet, and sure enough, it works. Shortly after drinking the yogurt, Kim starts to feel unwell and heads to the restroom. The officers monitoring her follow closely, but don't notice anything unusual. What they don't know is that Bryan has been waiting for her in the bathroom. As soon as they meet, he quickly signals for Kim to stay quiet, then pulls her into a stall, pressing the flush button to mask the noise. Under the cover of the water sound, Bryan swiftly removes the bug from Kim's clothing and wraps it in cloth. Once he confirms the listening device is disabled, he hands Kim an antidote and urges her to drink it immediately. It's not easy for the father and daughter to meet, especially with Bryan being wanted citywide. Kim then tells Bryan that her stepfather Stuart has been acting strangely. Since her mother's murder, he's hired a private bodyguard, clearly fearful of something. Just as Bryan is about to press for more details, Sheriff Frank and a team of officers burst into the school. The sheriff had already visited the convenience store and found the suspicious yogurt container in the trash outside with the note attached. He quickly mobilizes his team, planning to capture Bryan in the restroom. But when the officers break down the door, only Kim walks out. Meanwhile, Bryan, who has already moved to safety, throws a grenade into an empty storage room. The explosion sends people into a panic, causing chaos as the crowd flees and the fire sprinklers activate. In the confusion, capturing Bryan seems impossible. Though Sheriff Frank is frustrated, there's nothing he can do. To investigate Kim's suspicions, Bryan starts secretly tracking Stuart. However, just as he's focusing on his target, an SUV suddenly speeds toward him. It's clear the driver is prepared, and before Bryan can react, both he and his car are knocked off a cliff. To ensure there were no mistakes, the assassins throw a grenade at the car down the hill. When they see the entire vehicle blown to pieces, they believe Bryan is definitely dead and finally drive off. What they don't realize is that Bryan not only survives, but is completely unharmed. As soon as the killers leave, Bryan climbs back up the cliff, gun in hand, and stops a passing car. He doesn't pursue too far before spotting the same SUV that hit him earlier, parked in front of a supermarket. Inside, the killers are either picking out alcohol or chatting with the clerk, completely unaware of the danger closing in. Bryan quietly slips in, knocking one man out with a bottle. The other two, hearing the noise, pull out their guns and start searching. But after circling around, they find no one. Using his expert hand-to-hand combat skills, Bryan takes on both of them, quickly putting them on the ground. But before he can catch his breath, the lead assassin uses the reflection in a mirror to pinpoint Bryan's location. The two nearly fire at the same time, exchanging gunfire across the shelves. Once their magazines are empty, they switch to a brutal hand-to-hand fight. Thankfully, Bryan's superior skills allow him to disarm the assassin and subdue him. However, to his surprise, the guy remains tough as nails, refusing to give up any useful information, even with a gun pointed at him. Bryan immediately recognizes the tattoo on the assassin's arm and knows for sure that this man killed his ex-wife. He is also certain that Stuart is deeply involved in all of this. Without wasting any time, Bryan goes straight to Stuart's place and knocks him out with the butt of his gun. When Stuart regains consciousness, he finds himself in a remote cabin. Bryan, with no patience for further conversation, immediately resorts to waterboarding for information. Unable to bear the torture, Stuart finally confesses everything. It turns out that Stuart went bankrupt after a failed business deal and owes a large sum of money to a ruthless creditor, Markov. Markov is a dangerous man with a dark past, having served in Afghanistan and joined special forces. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, he quickly rose to power, becoming the head of Russia's largest crime syndicate. To force Stuart to pay, Markov threatens to kill his entire family. Desperate, Stuart deliberately brings up Bryan's name, knowing that due to Bryan's past relationship with his ex-wife and his deep love for his daughter Kim, he will never ignore such a crisis. In the end, whether Markov kills Bryan or Bryan kills Markov, Stuart plans to profit from whichever outcome. Bryan is furious at Stuart's cowardly tactics, but he quickly calms down. If Stuart's story is true, it means that Markov's next target could be Kim. Though Kim is under police protection, Bryan still feels uneasy. After all, his old friend's skills are far more reliable than regular cops. Taking a risk, Bryan knocks on the door of the room where the police are stationed. The officers are completely unprepared and don't even have a chance to draw their guns before they are knocked out. Bryan then takes Kim and escapes, heading back to the secret base. When Kim learns that her mother's death was caused by her stepfather's business dealings, she is seething with anger, wanting to kill Stuart on the spot. But Bryan stops her. Destroying the Russian gang will require Stuart's cooperation. Following Bryan's instructions, Stuart calls Markov, falsely claiming that he will voluntarily repay his debt. The two arrange to meet in 1 hour at Markov's private apartment. The apartment is on the top floor of a building and can only be accessed via a private elevator from the underground parking garage. However, there are guards stationed at the elevator, and the control room upstairs will only grant access once they ensure absolute safety. The security is tight, making it nearly impossible to sneak in. But Bryan, with his background as a former agent, makes a plan. He instructs Stuart to bring the money and walk openly to the elevator while Bryan hides, waiting for the right moment. As Stuart is frisked by the guards, Bryan's old friend Sam infiltrates the security system. Once Stuart is safely in the elevator, the surveillance footage freezes. Although the control room notices the glitch, they confirm everything is normal when asked about the situation downstairs. Bryan then uses a stun device to knock out 2 guards silently, switching places with Stuart in the elevator. With the fake surveillance footage covering their tracks, Bryan quietly makes his way to the top floor. As the elevator doors open, Bryan moves quickly, taking down all the guards in the hallway in a few swift moves. Hearing the commotion, more guards rush to assist, while those in the control room start firing machine guns in a frantic barrage. However, this heavy firepower doesn't harm Bryan in the slightest. Instead, he seizes the opportunity to fight back and successfully kills them all. As soon as Bryan gets back on his feet, reinforcements arrive. Despite their numbers, these are just gangsters with no real tactics. Bryan swiftly goes into kill mode. After taking out everyone, Bryan walks into the final room, gun in hand. Now, only Markov is left inside, but he occupies a strong position with powerful firepower suppressing Bryan. As soon as they face each other, Bryan is caught off guard. Luckily, he steadies himself in time, then uses the reflection to locate Markov's position. He shoots down a chandelier, forcing Markov to tumble down the stairs. But Markov, a former Soviet Special Forces soldier, is quick. As soon as he hits the ground, he opens fire with his machine gun. Bryan is pinned down with nowhere to go, so he crashes through the glass and dives into the next room. Just as he's getting up, Markov is already right in front of him, ready to teach Bryan a lesson. But the moment Bryan stands up, as Bryan raises his gun to end it all, Markov suddenly realizes the truth. It turns out that all of this was Stuart's plot. He had Markov kill Lenore and frame Bryan for it, because Stuart had taken out an insurance policy on his wife. If Lenore died, he would collect a huge payout of $10 million. Then, he deliberately incited Bryan and Markov to fight each other, ensuring that no matter the outcome, he would be the biggest beneficiary. But even with the truth revealed, Bryan cannot let Markov live. He knows Markov is a future threat. Meanwhile, Kim in the car inadvertently discovers that Stewart had used Bryan's phone to text her mother, arranging a meeting at that remote gas station. Just as she tries to warn Bryan, Stewart, realizing his cover is blown, suddenly takes action. He grabs the gun and shoots Bryan's old friend, and takes Kim hostage, fleeing the scene. Fortunately, out of habit, Bryan has kept the tracking app installed on Kim's phone. He quickly hops into his sports car and begins pursuing Stewart's escape route. By this time, Stewart, with Kim in tow, has boarded a private plane he had arranged earlier. Knowing Bryan's capabilities, Stewart urges the pilot to take off immediately. At the critical moment, just as the plane is about to take off, Bryan drifts his car onto the runway, heading straight for the plane. In a death-defying move, Bryan successfully intercepts the aircraft. Stewart emerges with Kim, initially planning to fight to the end, but he underestimates the unspoken bond between father and daughter. Bryan rushes forward, unleashing a furious series of punches and kicks on Stewart. He's desperate to kill this bastard and avenge his ex-wife, but as the sound of approaching sirens fills the air, Stewart becomes confident. Seeing the worry in Kim's eyes, Bryan finally suppresses his urge to kill.